So you have an idea for an app that you think is going to be profitable, but you've never built or launched an app before. So what now? Well, in this video, we're going to talk through every single step you need to know and consider in order to get from the idea stage with your app to having new paying users coming on board each and every day. So there are three main phases or stages that you're going to go through. And you're starting over here where you have that app idea and you want to make your way all the way over here where you are rolling out the app, which again is where you are having real paying users coming on board more and more every single day. So the three stages that we're going to break apart are number one, the profit check stage. And this is pretty straightforward. It's where you are making sure that it makes sense to invest in your app idea, both from a time and a financial standpoint. So in other words, you need to make sure you're going to be receiving a return on that investment, whether that is in the form of a financial return on this particular app itself, or maybe it's a return on the new skill set that you've developed that allows you to create other apps. The second stage you're going to be going through is the alpha phase. And this is where you are building out the first version of your app itself and making sure that the solution you've come up with actually solves the core problem it's intended to solve. So right now, your app idea is a theory, really. You have a theory that a particular set of features can solve a core problem and enable a specific outcome for users. But there are always differences or unknown aspects, really, that come up when you put that theory or that product into practice. And so you need to make sure that your product solves the core problem in all the ways you anticipated that it would, and if not, how you need to change it in order to improve that. And the third one is the beta phase. Now, this one is a little bit different. With the alpha phase, you are confirming that your core product solves a particular problem. With the beta phase, you're confirming that your core product solves that particular problem on a consistent basis in real life applications for your users. So at this point, they should be able to take your app, put it into their real life applications, and use it for extended periods of time and receive that same outcome again and again and again. So these are two slightly different testing phases with two different outcomes that you want to be seeing. So right now, you're in this idea stage where you are trying to figure out these next steps, and we want to get you into and ideally through this profit check stage. Now, there are two specific aspects of the profit check stage that you need to be considering. So the first thing is the value validation. Okay, now this one is pretty straightforward. You really just need to validate your app. Now, we have another video that goes more in depth on the validation process, so make sure to check that out if you haven't fully validated your app yet. But essentially, what you're doing here, or the question that you're answering is, are users going to pay to solve the problem that your app aims to solve? Now, you need a few ingredients that will tell you whether or not users will likely pay for this. Now, one of these is the severity of the problem that your app is solving. The more severe the problem, the more likely users are to want to pay to solve that problem. So what kind of pain points is this problem creating for your user? How severe are they? What kind of consequences are these causing in people's day-to-day lives or in their businesses? Now, the second thing is the urgency level of this problem or of solving the problem. How urgent is it for users to get rid of those pain points and those consequences. Now, generally, severity and urgency are going to go hand in hand. The more severe, usually the more urgency there is to get rid of those. So you want to be looking at those two things. Now, a third kind of factor in this is competition for your app. And I say competition, and that, that might bring up thoughts of other apps that are solving the same problem, but competition can come in other forms as well. So think about current solutions available to solve the problem you're trying to solve with your app. That might be other apps that people are using. If people are paying for other apps that solve the same problem in similar ways, ideally not the exact same way, well, that's a really good sign for you. That kind of doubly validates the severity and the urgency that you're looking for. But you can also be looking for other types of solutions for solving this problem. Maybe currently people are paying for other people to solve the problem. Maybe there are service providers or employees that solve certain problems within a business. Or on a smaller scale, maybe people are solving this problem with spreadsheets or with post-it notes, maybe there are instances where employees of a business work out in the field, maybe service agents, and currently they're working on paper, right? They're using pen and paper to document their processes, right? So that competition that you're looking for, it's not necessarily other apps, although it can be, and that's a good sign. It can be lots of other things as well. Now, when you have the severity and the urgency, and ideally some form of competition, then you have that value validation, and that is a very good sign that moving forward with your app idea is going to be a smart investment for you. Now, you also want to be looking at personal gain, okay? And this is something that a lot of people actually ignore. But if you are using no-code tools to build your app and you're building your app yourself, now we'll talk more about choosing different development paths and no-code tools in just a minute. But assuming you are, well, not every single app idea is going to be financially successful. That's just something that as an entrepreneur, you have to be at least comfortable with, right? A little bit of risk. Now, the risk becomes greater the higher your investment is in order to take that risk or test your theory. But if you can get a different type of return aside from the financial return, then that is going to make the risk, any risk that you might be taking, more worthwhile. So if you're using no-code tools and you are building your app yourself, you're going to be developing a skill set alongside your app. Now, this is something we help our own entrepreneurs do. They build their apps, but we help them build their apps by helping them develop that skill set so they can understand how to use no-code tools, to put it really simply, but also development best practices so that they can take their capability of using no-code tools and apply that to different use cases or different scenarios. They learn how to go through testing processes, how to find initial users for an app. These are skills that if you're developing these alongside your app itself, that's going to create a lot more value for you, even if this particular app idea you have right now doesn't end up being as successful financially as you want it to. Having the skill set enables you to pivot, right? Either with that same app idea, or maybe create a different app idea, or really just do anything with no-code tools. Create different automations, whether it has to do with an app idea individually, or maybe with a larger system in your business, or even in your role as an employee within a company. So, if the personal gain is also going to be coming from this, then that makes it even more compelling for you to move forward with your app idea, and that can push you through that profit check phase confidently. That brings us into this alpha phase. And again, this is where you are building the very first version of your product itself. Now, there are a couple kind of precursors to going into this phase. Now, the first one is to decide on the development path you want to take as you move forward. Now, you can choose to outsource the development of your app. You can be completely hands-off and hire a developer or an agency to build the app for you. Or you can take a completely DIY approach, do-it-yourself approach, using no-code tools. You can learn how to use a particular platform, like Bubble, for example, which is the platform we use, and you can build the app yourself through a process of trial and error, through following video tutorials like some of the ones you're going to find on our channel. And you can also kind of merge these two by taking what's called a DWY approach, or a done with you approach, which, as I mentioned before, this puts the power in your hands and the control of development in your hands, but with guidance and structure and processes along the way so that you can move more quickly, build a more quality app, and really reduce that trial and error. Now, each of these comes with its own pros and cons. So with the complete outsourced approach, the done for you approach, this is going to cost more. Generally, it's going to be faster, certainly, than the DIY approach, sometimes more than the DWY approach. It's going to be more expensive, and generally, you're going to receive a more quality product than if you were to take that DIY approach, which does involve, of course, a lot of trial and error. Opposing the outsource is that DIY. You're not going to have as quality of a product, or if you do, it's going to be after probably several rebuilds, right? If you're learning along the way by trial and error, once you get to the other side of development, you're probably going to go back and rebuild now that you know what you know, right? But then that DWY approach kind of combines the two and also balances out all these different factors with cost and time frame and the quality of the app, because of course you have a professional alongside you making sure that things are done correctly. So you want to decide on the correct development path for yourself. Now, the second thing you need to decide on before you can move into this stage is the no-code platform that you want to use if you are moving forward with that DWY or the DIY approach. In other words, if you're building the app yourself, which platform are you going to use? Now, as I mentioned before, we personally use Bubble with our own entrepreneurs because of the flexibility, the control, and the power that it gives you. When you're using Bubble, you're pretty much starting with a blank canvas, which means that you can create everything from the front-end design to the back-end, all of the workflows, literally everything exactly how you want. You don't have to rely on templates or make any compromises. And this is a really big benefit because with other platforms or some that are going to be more template based, you are going to have to make compromises, and generally that's a turnoff for a lot of entrepreneurs. If you're considering Bubble or you're really just not sure, I'm going to drop a link in the description below to a Bubble Decider Guide. So this is a guide just packed full of information that's going to help you understand whether or not Bubble is right for your particular app. Now, regardless, whichever platform you do end up choosing, once you have those two big things decided, the development path and the platform, you can move into this alpha stage. While you're in this stage, you're going to be considering two other more granular things. Now, one of these is the must-have features of your app. So in other words, you're going to need to scope out what the most valuable first version of your app what it looks like. And when I say the most valuable version, what I mean is which features are going to actually solve that core problem. Because in order to have any type of monetary value, that initial core problem has to be solved. Now, we're not going to go through an entire scoping process in this video. We do have others, and actually we have a free training and template which I will also link to in the description down below. But as a broad overview, you need to break up your app's feature set into 4 categories. So you're going to have must-have features, which we've already mentioned here. And you're also going to have should-have features, could-have features, and won't have features for now, meaning you won't have them, but just for now. You can have them later. Now, your must-have features are those that are absolutely critical to solving that core problem. Your should-have features are going to come in a bit later, and we're going to get to those in the next phase that we talk through. The could-have features are ones that are really more focused on user experience. They aren't necessary to solve the problem, but they could make the experience better. And those won't have features are the ones that just aren't going to be relevant or really all that helpful until you have a certain volume of users on board the app. So you want to take every single feature idea that you have and break them down into those 4 categories. And again, there's a training and a template that you can use down below to help you do this in a really organized way. But once you have those, of course, you're going to be able to understand what that alpha version is going to look like, and you can start the actual development of your app. Now, alongside the development, I want to make sure you're also creating an early user waiting list. This is really important and is something that is often put off until later. So you don't want to build your app and then find users. You want to build your app and find users. So as soon as your first version is ready to launch, those users can immediately come on board. Okay, so once that first version development is finished, you want to push down on the gas pedal versus let off with your app itself in order to find users. Okay, so you can do something really simple like create a landing page, or honestly, you don't even have to create a landing page. You can just start doing some really simple, straightforward user outreach. This is something we also help our own entrepreneurs do. It should not be that complicated. You really just want to start talking about your app in relevant spaces or to relevant people. And you just want to have conversations, or just think about starting conversations so that you can get people interested in your app, start collecting names, email addresses, phone numbers, whatever is relevant for you. And again, once you're ready to go through that very first launch and testing phase, those users are already there waiting for you. This honestly is probably more important than your app idea itself. This is something I've said before, and the reason is because if you have a list of people within a target market who have a particular problem, your app idea itself can change in tons of different ways, and it can still be relevant to those people. This is really important. So that means if at some point you get feedback that you do need to pivot, or something changes with your idea, maybe you decide to make a change, well, you don't have to change that user waiting list. So this is something that's going to be really invaluable for you, and you need to be creating it right during this alpha phase. So in order to move forward into the beta phase, you got to have those must-have features in place, and you need to have your early user waitlist. From there, you are going to move in, of course, to that beta phase. And this is where you have the validation for the core product itself. You've gone through alpha testing, meaning the functionality is all there. The app works from start to finish. And the core feature set you've created can solve the problem it's been designed to solve. Now you need to make sure you can solve it consistently in real life applications. Now, going from the alpha phase to the beta phase shouldn't require that much of a change. Okay, this is really just enabling users to come on board the app themselves and use it consistently. So in the alpha testing stage, maybe you manually onboarded those initial test users to have them use the app in a contained testing window just to get that initial validation. Now you just need to add a couple more layers of features to let them come on board themselves and then take it and run with it. So this is where those should have features are going to come into play that we already talked about. So you started with your must-have features, and the should-have features are really simply just those that allow users to use the app consistently on their own. Okay, so this can be like adding an onboarding process if you had manually onboarded them, right? It can be as simple as that. Now, once you have those in place and users can use it on your own, you need to focus on the actual value exchange. So your beta testing process, and I'm going to repeat this again, even if it sounds a little bit redundant, is to make sure users can consistently use the app in real life applications. Okay, now if they can do that, you've already confirmed that it does solve the core problem. That means value is being exchanged. Okay, until value is exchanged, it doesn't really make sense to charge users to use your app. So during that alpha phase, and I keep going back to the really simple example of maybe you manually onboard a group of test users and just have them test the app in a contained time frame to validate the product itself, right? You're not going to charge users for that because they're not putting it to use in a consistent way in real life applications. There's not value being exchanged. You're receiving value from their feedback, and they're receiving potential value because they're helping to mold the app into something that is going to give them real value. But it doesn't make sense to charge them quite yet. But once you're in the beta phase and that value is being exchanged, then you do want to make sure that you're charging users to stay on board the app because this is what's going to ultimately, of course, allow you to grow that business. So these are the factors that are going to take you from that idea stage into the rollout phases of your app where you're consistently growing that user base and growing that paid user base. But that said, you're probably still going to have several different big questions, and we're going to hit on some of those now. Now, one of the biggest questions we get, or one of the most common scenarios we see, is people trying to skip the alpha and the beta stages because they're already confident that their product is valid and that once it's built, it will be able to be used to solve a core problem on a consistent basis in real life applications. So the question really is, if I know my app is going to be profitable, if I know it's just a killer idea, can I skip those initial testing phases and skip the must have, should have, could have, won't have development phases and just build everything now and kind of like fast track the success? And the answer is no, do not do that. And this even applies to people who are building their apps for internal purposes only. So even if we have, a business owner come to us and say, I want to build this app to help run my business in a more streamlined way, I'm not going to be onboarding external users. It's just going to be me and my team. Even in that situation, you still want to go through those development phases and the testing phases because the set of features that you have theorized are going to solve this problem may very well solve the problem, but the ways in which they solve the problem, or how effectively it happens, or ineffectively, which is usually the case at first, you don't know until you put it into practice. So you need to go through that alpha testing or that alpha development stage and testing stage to make sure the core product is sound. Everything is built on top of that. Okay, you're not going to paint the walls of a house first or hang the decorations before you actually have the frame done and the foundation right or the wiring done. You're not going to do any of that. It's the same with your app. Okay, go through the proper development stages and make sure, even if you're not bringing external users on board, that it works how you think it's going to work in practice. Even when we're building our own apps for our own business, this is something that we do because there are always going to be changes that you're going to need to make. And you want to figure those out before you've already added a bunch of other layers onto the app. Once you do that, if you launch your app with the must have, should have, could have, and won't have features already in place, and then you put it into practice, and then you get the feedback on all the things that you need to change, and there are going to be lots of them if you do that, your testing process and just going in and reworking all of the little components that you need to change is going to be a major headache. It's so much easier to do that in those incremental stages, so do not skip these steps. Another question we sometimes get is, when do marketing campaigns and ads come into play? Or put in another way, do I really need to go through the more manual user outreach if I'm just going to be running paid ads? Right? It's going to be a lot faster, and I don't want to spend the time during development. I just want to focus on the build. When does all this come into play? Well, you don't want to create complex or paid marketing advertising campaigns until you're actually in the later stages of your beta testing. Just like your product itself has to be validated, even if in theory it's going to work, your messaging, your outreach, your marketing, all of that has to be validated in the exact same way. So if you were to take your messaging, whatever messaging that you have come up with, and pay to spread that around the internet before you've had conversations with your alpha testers, your beta testers, before you've gotten feedback, before you've learned the words that actually resonate with them, before you've learned how they describe the problem, how they describe the outcome, or how they even talk about your app, you're going to be throwing money away, right? You're going to be paying really for research, which you can do if you have funding set aside for that. You can pay to test out that messaging. But in most cases, if you're looking to build the app yourself and you're looking to use no-code tools and you're taking a more hands-on approach, you probably don't have a significant budget set aside for that. So you are going to need to do some manual work. It doesn't have to be complicated, but that's going to let you validate your messaging just like you're validating your product, so that later on, once you know you have a message that resonates and that gets people nodding their heads like, yes, this sounds like exactly what I need, then when you put money behind that, you know you're going to get a return. It's so much smarter. Now, another question is, when should I start talking about my app idea? And that's usually not the literal question. Usually the question is, should I create an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, before I talk to anyone about my app idea? And look, we're not attorneys, so if you need to consult with your legal experts, then do that first. But the way we've always approached building a business, which if you're building an app, that's what you're aiming to do. It's to talk about that business during the idea stage, during the development stage, and of course thereafter. Because the reality is, if you are not talking about your app, then no one is going to be talking about your app. You have to get the word out. You have to get people interested. You have to create excitement. You have to have conversations to even get that messaging validation that we've already talked about. Okay, so if you're keeping your app idea a secret, you're doing yourself a disservice. We have other videos that go really deeply into the thought process behind this, because it's natural to feel a little bit protective of your app idea. But the reality is, there's two things I want you to think about. One, going back to that profit check stage, competition is a really good thing. It means there's that severity and the urgency, which means there are paying users who are going to want to use your app. If you don't have any form of competition, then I would question whether you were ready to move out of that stage. Now, of course, this is not black and white because competition can come in the form of other types of solutions. But the other thing to think about is, if you've gotten to this point where you have the knowledge, expertise, the thought process, the planning process. Think of all the hours that you've already put into thinking through how this app idea is going to affect people and planning it, and all the personal experience you've had with this, right? It's that is going to help you be successful. It's your passion for helping people solve this problem that's going to help you be successful. It's not a feature set, okay? It's just not, because a feature set is always copyable, and it's everything else that goes around that is going to propel you forward. So if you are not talking about your app, then no one is going to be. So as soon as you can start talking about it, that's what I would do. Now, the other question is, what do I do next? So we've covered all of these steps in this video so that you can conceptualize what this process is going to look like for you. But now you have to put it into practice, which is, of course, where the hard stuff comes into play. Now, well, I say hard because it is going to take time and focus and effort, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Now, to uncomplicate the process of scoping your app, of building the first version, or using no-code tools, right? Of doing all of these things, I want you to head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, where you're going to be able to join in on a free extended training that's going to walk you through all of that step by step. So you're actually going to start putting things to practice, but you don't have to do it on your own. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop to get started on that. We'll look forward to seeing you there.